I met Daniel 3 summers ago, on one of those evenings that start ordinary and somehow turn into something unforgettable. He was the kind of man who listened like every word I said mattered. There was a warmth in his attention, the way his eyes lingered just long enough to make me feel seen but never uncomfortable. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but when he spoke, the world around us seemed to hush a little. It wasn't instant love, it was slow curiosity. He carried an ease about him, a quiet confidence that drew me in. From the beginning, our connection felt different. We didn't rush into declarations or labels. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Books, dreams, regrets, the kind of people we used to be. I remember how he looked at me when I laughed. It wasn't just affection, it was admiration. He told me once that he loved how I could make any space feel lighter just by being in it. Those words stayed with me, lingering in my chest long after he said them. When we officially started dating, it felt like slipping into something familiar. He made me feel safe and desired at the same time, a balance I hadn't known was possible. We'd spend evenings cooking together, music playing softly in the background. He'd lean on the counter, watching me move around the kitchen, smiling like he was memorizing every small gesture. I used to tease him about staring too much, and he'd laugh and say, "I just like watching you be yourself." It sounded sweet then, harmless even. Over time, I started noticing how much he enjoyed seeing me through other people's eyes. When we went out with friends, he'd nudge me to tell stories, to be the center of attention. "You light up when people listen to you," he'd say. I thought it was his way of being proud, like he wanted to share me with the world. At dinner parties, he'd compliment me in front of everyone, his voice soft but deliberate. "You should have seen the way she handled that client today." Or, "You're all lucky to hear her laugh in person." It was flattering, in a strange way. Then came the subtler moments. The ones I didn't pay much attention to at first. We'd be at a cafe, and if someone looked at me a little longer than usual, I'd feel his eyes on me, not with jealousy, but with quiet approval. He'd reach for my hand under the table, squeeze it gently, almost as if to say, "I see it too." I brushed it off, telling myself it was just part of his confidence. Daniel wasn't possessive, he was secure, or so I believed. But something in his compliments began to shift. They stopped being about me and started being about how others might see me. He'd say, "I love the way men turn their heads when you walk in," or, "You don't realize how much attention you draw, do you?" He said it with a grin, but I couldn't shake the flicker of discomfort that followed. I didn't know whether to feel admired or objectified. The line between the two blurred quietly, almost gracefully. There was one evening I still remember vividly. We attended a friend's engagement party, and I wore a red dress Daniel had picked out. I felt beautiful, but halfway through the night, I noticed him standing across the room, watching me talk to someone else. Our eyes met, and for a moment, he didn't move toward me, he just observed. His expression wasn't possessive or jealous. It was fascinated. When we finally got home, he told me how stunning I looked, how he loved seeing people drawn to me. "It makes me proud," he said. "You're magnetic." I smiled, but deep inside, something shifted. There was pride in his voice, yes, but also an edge of something I couldn't name. After that night, his fascination seemed to grow. Sometimes he'd ask how people reacted to me, what they said, what I felt. His questions were detailed, specific, almost too intimate for casual curiosity. I told myself he was just interested in how I saw the world, in understanding me. But sometimes, when I caught the tone of his voice, it felt different, like he was collecting moments he hadn't lived himself. I tried not to overthink it. We were happy, or at least that's what I told myself. Our days still carried warmth, shared breakfasts, inside jokes, soft arguments that ended in laughter. But underneath the surface, there was a growing hum I couldn't ignore. The way he watched me started to feel less like affection and more like observation. I began to wonder if he loved me, or the image of me reflected through others. I remember asking him one night, half jokingly, "Do you ever get jealous?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "No," he said quietly. "I like seeing people appreciate what I already have." The words should have felt flattering, but they didn't. There was something detached in the way he said it, like I wasn't a person he loved, but a performance he admired. Still, I stayed. Because love, especially when it begins beautifully, doesn't unravel all at once. It frays quietly at the edges while you convince yourself it's just your imagination. I wanted to believe his fascination came from love, from admiration, from pride. I wanted to believe that his gaze meant connection, not distance. But slowly, doubt began to grow. Every compliment from another person became a test. Every glance, every laugh, every lingering look felt like something he was waiting to witness. And the strangest part was that he seemed happier during those moments, when others noticed me, when I smiled at someone else, when I seemed slightly out of reach. It was as if my attention, when divided, thrilled him more than when it was his alone. By the time I realized how much I was analyzing every interaction, it was already too late. The innocence had faded. What once felt like love now carried undertones of performance, of silent expectations. I had become aware of being watched, not in a controlling or possessive way, but in a quiet, unsettling one. Like I was living in a story he was directing, without realizing when I stopped writing my own lines. And yet, every time I looked at him, I still saw the man who made me feel safe, the man who listened. I couldn't reconcile the two versions of him, the tender lover and the detached observer. I didn't know then that this subtle imbalance, this blurred line between admiration and objectification, would soon lead us down a path neither of us could turn back from. It started subtly, the way most shifts in relationships do. So slowly that you don't even notice it's happening until you're too deep to remember what normal felt like. Daniel's fascination with me being noticed became part of our everyday rhythm. I didn't question it much because it was never loud or demanding. It lived in the quiet moments, the pauses between words. One evening, we went to a friend's birthday dinner. It was one of those long tables filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and stories that stretched late into the night. Daniel sat across from me instead of beside me. When I looked up, I caught him watching me again, smiling softly every time someone laughed at something I said. I didn't think much of it until he told me later, "You looked so alive tonight. I loved seeing you like that." He kissed me afterward, tender and warm, and I told myself it was harmless. But soon, his comments began to take on a different weight. He'd ask, "Did you notice how that guy couldn't stop looking at you?" Or, "Do you like it when people flirt with you?" His tone was always casual, teasing even, but the questions lingered in my mind long after. I wasn't used to someone encouraging that kind of attention. I'd laugh it off, tell him he was being ridiculous, but he'd just smile and say, "I'm serious. You're beautiful. You should know the effect you have on people." At first, I mistook it for confidence. Maybe he was secure enough to let me shine without feeling threatened. But then there were moments when I felt his eyes on me in public, watching not out of affection, but with quiet fascination. If someone complimented me, he'd study my reaction more than theirs. I started to realize that he wasn't interested in whether I liked the attention. He was interested in the attention itself. There was one evening when the air between us felt different. We were sitting at home, wine glasses half full, the kind of night that invites honesty. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if someone else kissed you?" I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Why would I?" I said. He shrugged, eyes steady on mine. "Just curious. I think it would be kind of exciting. For both of us." The silence that followed felt heavy. I laughed softly, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh back. He just looked at me, his expression calm but unreadable. I tried to shake it off, but a small crack had formed somewhere between us. It was the first time I felt something cold beneath the warmth of his affection. After that night, the questions became more pointed. Do people flirt with you at work? Does it make you feel good? What would you do if I wasn't around? I'd tell him to stop asking, that it was weird, but he'd just smile like he knew something I didn't. There was no malice in his tone, no anger, just curiosity wrapped in affection. But it unsettled me. The more he asked, the more I felt like I was being pushed into a space I didn't understand. It wasn't that I was tempted by anyone else, I wasn't. It was that he seemed to want me to be. And that thought sat uneasily in my chest. I couldn't decide whether he was testing me or living out something he didn't have the courage to admit. Still, our relationship looked perfect from the outside. Friends envied how open we were with each other, how honest. And maybe that was part of the problem. We confused openness with permission, honesty with indulgence. There's a fine line between freedom and abandonment, and we were walking it without realizing it. One weekend, we went to a wedding. The music was loud, the wine stronger than I expected, and the dance floor crowded. Daniel urged me to dance, even when he stayed behind. "Go have fun," he said. "I love watching you." So I danced, first with friends, then with people I barely knew. I caught his eyes a few times from across the room. He was smiling, calm, content. When I returned to him later, flushed and laughing, he leaned close and whispered, "You looked incredible out there." His voice was low, almost possessive, but not quite. "I could tell people wanted you." Something inside me twisted. I wanted him to dance with me, to pull me close, to remind me that I was his partner, not his entertainment. But instead, he seemed satisfied just watching. When we got home, he kissed me like he'd been waiting all night, like the dance had been foreplay meant for him alone. It was confusing, his distance during the night and his passion afterward. I couldn't tell if I was being loved or performed for. Over the next few weeks, he became even more interested in the details I used to overlook. "What did that guy at work say to you? Did you like when he complimented you? What did it feel like when he looked at you like that?" His questions were layered, not jealous, not angry, just quietly eager. It was like he found beauty in imagining me through someone else's desire. I started feeling split in two, the version of me that belonged to him and the version he liked to imagine. Sometimes I'd catch myself playing along, answering his questions with vague, harmless details, trying to please him, trying to keep whatever spark he was chasing alive. But afterward, I'd feel guilty, like I was participating in something I didn't understand. Our conversations changed too. Less about our dreams and plans, more about what ifs and maybes. It was as if he was slowly pulling me into a version of love where boundaries didn't exist. And because I loved him, I tried to convince myself it was just another shade of intimacy. I told myself he was open-minded, experimental, emotionally fearless. I didn't see that what he really wanted was control disguised as freedom. The truth was, I had started to feel lonely, even when he was right beside me. His eyes still followed me everywhere, but they no longer felt like home. They felt like mirrors reflecting back a version of myself I didn't recognize. I missed being seen for who I was, not for how others might see me. One night, after another long silence between us, I asked him, "What are you really looking for?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable, then said softly, "I just want to feel something real. Something raw." The irony was, I thought that's what we already had. But in that moment, I realized his definition of real was different from mine. He wasn't chasing love anymore. He was chasing thrill, validation, some hidden hunger that had nothing to do with me. I went to bed that night with a strange heaviness in my chest, sensing that something was coming, a line waiting to be crossed, a test I wasn't prepared for. And deep down, I already knew that whatever came next would change everything. It happened on an evening that felt ordinary, which is always how these things begin. There was no grand argument, no build-up of anger, no sudden break. Just a quiet moment that shifted everything. Daniel came home from work unusually calm. We had dinner together, talking about nothing important. The silence between sentences felt comfortable, not tense. Then, as he poured himself another glass of wine, he said something that made my stomach tighten. "I've been thinking," he began, eyes fixed on the glass in his hand, "maybe you should go out with someone. Just once. To see what it feels like." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to laugh it off. He met my eyes then, unblinking. "I mean it. You've always said you wonder how different people make you feel. I think it could be freeing. For both of us." There was no hint of jealousy in his tone, only a calmness that unsettled me. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. "That's not something people in relationships do," I said quietly. He smiled faintly, like he'd expected that answer. You said once that love should be honest. I'm just being honest. I like seeing you through other people's eyes. I want you to feel what it's like to be wanted like that. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My heart pounded with confusion, fear, and something else I didn't want to name. I went to bed early that night, but I barely slept. His words replayed in my head like a whisper that refused to fade. Over the next few days, he didn't bring it up again, but the silence around us changed. He was gentler than usual, more attentive, as if he was giving me space to think. But I didn't want space, I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand what he was asking of me. It wasn't about trust anymore. It felt like a test, one I didn't want to pass. Then one Friday, he told me he'd be gone for the weekend for a work trip. As he packed, he kissed me softly and said, "Go out. Have fun. Don't overthink things." The way he said it sounded normal, but the meaning beneath it wasn't. His eyes lingered on mine a moment too long before he left. That night, I met a coworker for drinks, someone harmless, someone I barely thought about outside of work. I didn't plan anything, I just wanted distraction. We talked, laughed, shared a bottle of wine. It felt light, effortless. But somewhere between the laughter and the quiet pauses, I felt the weight of Daniel's words pressing down on me. I wasn't there as myself, I was there as an extension of his curiosity. When my coworker's hand brushed mine, I didn't pull away. The touch was innocent, fleeting, but it carried 1,000 implications. I thought about Daniel's voice in my head, "I just want you to feel what it's like." For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to step outside the boundaries we'd built. To feel wanted for myself, not through his eyes. And then, I did. Not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't recognize love anymore. Because what we had blurred so many lines that I no longer knew which ones mattered. It wasn't a grand affair, not some passionate, reckless act. It was small, quiet, human. A kiss that lingered too long. A choice that felt both wrong and inevitable. When it happened, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like surrender. Afterward, as I sat alone in my car, reality crashed over me. My hands trembled. The air felt heavy. I didn't know whether to cry or call him. The guilt didn't hit all at once, it came in waves, subtle and suffocating. I drove home in silence, my mind looping through 1,000 questions with no answers. When Daniel returned 2 days later, I expected anger, distance, suspicion, something. But he was calm, almost peaceful. He kissed me hello, his smile easy, his tone light. It unnerved me more than any confrontation would have. That night, while I was washing dishes, he asked softly, "Did you go out?" I froze. My breath caught. "Yes," I said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He turned off the faucet and leaned against the counter, watching me. "Did you enjoy yourself?" I looked at him then, searching for anger, disappointment, anything. But his expression was unreadable. When I didn't answer, he smiled faintly. "You don't have to say anything. I can tell." The way he said it made my heart ache. It wasn't approval or forgiveness, it was something colder, like validation. I wanted him to ask why, to be hurt, to be human. But instead, he just walked away quietly, as if he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. That night, he touched me differently, gentler, slower, but detached, almost as if he was picturing something else. For the first time, I felt invisible in his arms. His affection wasn't about us anymore. It was about the story he had wanted to see unfold. Days passed, and he didn't mention it again. We went back to our routines, pretending nothing had changed, but everything had. Every word between us carried weight. Every silence felt heavy with things unsaid. He looked at me differently now, not with admiration, but with quiet satisfaction, as if he'd solved a riddle. And me, I felt hollow. The act that was supposed to make things clearer only deepened the distance. I couldn't tell if I'd betrayed him or if we'd betrayed each other long before that night. Because in some twisted way, he wanted it to happen. And I, in my confusion and exhaustion, let it. One evening, I tried to bring it up. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you really feel okay with what happened?" He looked up from his book, calm as ever. I do. It's what I wanted. His words were like ice. You wanted me to cheat on you? I asked, voice trembling. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You call it cheating. I call it understanding. Something inside me broke then, not from guilt, but from realization. This wasn't love anymore. It was fascination. He hadn't wanted my heart. He wanted my boundaries to disappear. He wanted to watch the moment I stopped belonging only to myself. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling smaller than I ever had. He slept peacefully, his arm draped across me like a symbol of possession, not affection. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that whatever we had built was no longer real. It wasn't the act itself that ended us. It was the truth beneath it, the understanding that he loved watching me more than he loved being with me. That he didn't want to share my world, he wanted to orchestrate it. I had crossed a line to please him, and in doing so, I'd lost a part of myself I couldn't get back. The days that followed felt suspended, like time was moving but I wasn't. We still shared the same space, the same bed, the same conversations about groceries and weekend plans. But underneath every word, there was an invisible wall, one neither of us cared to acknowledge. Daniel acted as though everything was normal, as though what happened was part of some silent agreement we had both signed. I tried to mirror his calm, but inside, I was unraveling. He started looking at me differently, not with affection or desire, but with something that felt like quiet pride. When I caught his gaze across the room, there was a softness there, but it wasn't love, it was satisfaction. The kind people wear after winning something they'd been chasing. I realized then that he didn't see what I had done as betrayal. To him, it was a kind of completion. His curiosity had finally been fed. One morning, I watched him getting ready for work, buttoning his shirt with that same unhurried grace that had once drawn me in. He smiled when he noticed me watching. "You're thinking too much again," he said gently. I forced a smile in return, but inside I wanted to scream. How could he be so at peace with what had happened? How could something that left me hollow leave him content? I spent the day in silence, trying to understand him, or maybe trying to understand myself. I thought back to when we first met, how pure it had felt, how effortless. Somewhere along the way, the boundaries between love, trust, and obsession had blurred. He had always told me he loved watching me. I just never realized he meant it so literally. In the evenings, when we sat together, I found myself studying him the way he used to study me. There was a sadness behind his calm exterior, though he would never admit it. I think, in his own twisted way, he believed what we had done had deepened our connection. But it hadn't. It had hollowed it out, leaving only the shell of what we used to be. A few weeks later, we went out to dinner, our first since that night. The restaurant was quiet, candlelight flickering between us. He reached across the table for my hand, and I let him hold it. "You seem distant lately," he said. "Are you unhappy?" His voice was tender, almost worried, and for a moment I wanted to lie, to tell him everything was fine. But something inside me broke open instead. "I don't know what I am," I said softly. "I feel like we've built something beautiful on something broken." He frowned slightly, confused. "We've just been honest with each other," he said. "That's what makes us different. Most people lie about what they want. We don't." I shook my head. "You call it honesty, but it felt like permission. Permission to stop seeing me as a person. To turn love into an experiment." He didn't respond right away. He just looked at me, searching for something in my face that I no longer had to give. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to understand what love really means." "And did you?" I asked. He didn't answer. His eyes fell to the table, and in that silence, I understood that he didn't find love, he dissected it. He turned it inside out, studied it, and lost it in the process. That night, when we got home, I packed a small bag. Not because I was angry, but because I finally felt done. The kind of done that doesn't come from rage, but from exhaustion. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood in the doorway, watching, the way he always had. "So this is it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I think it was a long time ago. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You'll regret leaving, he said, not as a threat, but as a quiet certainty. Maybe, I whispered. But staying feels like I'd be regretting myself. I left that night. The streets were empty, the city quiet, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't relief, not yet. Just stillness. A pause between endings and beginnings. In the days that followed, I kept replaying everything in my mind. His words, his eyes, the way it all started with something that looked like admiration. I realized that love, when it turns into observation, stops being love. It becomes a mirror, reflecting only what one person wants to see. And I had spent too long performing for that mirror. For weeks, he didn't reach out. Then, one evening, a message appeared on my phone. I hope you're okay. I still love watching you, even from afar. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling that same familiar ache in my chest. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Months passed. I moved into a small apartment, quiet and sunlit. I started reading again, cooking again, laughing again. It was strange at first, doing things without the feeling of being watched. Strange, but liberating. I began to rediscover parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd hidden. Sometimes I'd think of Daniel, not with anger, but with a kind of distant sadness. He had loved me in his own way, but it was a kind of love that consumed more than it gave. I understood now that some people don't want partnership. They want reflection. They fall in love with the version of you that fits the story in their head. And once that story is complete, they don't know what to do with the real person left behind. I stopped blaming him for what happened. I stopped blaming myself too. Love doesn't always die with betrayal. Sometimes, it dies with understanding, with the quiet realization that what you mistook for intimacy was only fascination dressed in affection. Now, when I think about it, I don't feel bitterness anymore. Just clarity. He loved watching me, yes, but he never really saw me. And I think that's the saddest kind of infidelity, the one where the body stays faithful, but the heart drifts away long before the act ever happens. I learned that true love isn't about freedom without limits or honesty without empathy. It's about safety. The kind of love that lets you be seen without being studied. That asks to know you, not to test you. That wants to grow beside you, not through you. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear his voice in my memory. The soft way he said my name, the calm tone that once made me feel safe. But now, I don't mistake calm for love. I know the difference. I've learned that the person who truly loves you doesn't need to watch you to feel connected. They just need to see you, and stay.